So I have a drink coaster on my desk that says, be happy. And I've had it for years. I actually remember buying it. Like I was willing myself to be happier, almost chastising myself for not being happy in a way that I felt like I should be. And for a long time, I didn't kind of think that much about it. It was a coaster that was commanding me to be happy. But lately, I've been looking at the coaster, the same coaster I've been using for years, and I've been looking at it a little bit differently because somewhere along the way, this concept of be happy stopped being this cheerful little reminder, and it started to feel really like an indictment that I think that it actually was. Be happy, as in, that's the goal. That's the thing you should be arriving at. And if you're not there, if you're anxious or tired or flat or sad or carrying something that you can't quite name well, clearly you were doing it wrong. I think that I absorbed that message somewhere early and built a whole system around it. If I find something difficult, the job was to fix it or push through it, or at minimum, stop letting it show so much. I got very efficient at it. Something hard would surface and I'd basically acknowledge it with a nod, like, yeah, okay, I see you, but then pivot as fast as I could towards something productive, toward fine, toward functional. And I'm not sure that I've ever stopped to ask whether or not that was actually helping or whether I was just really good at bypassing things that were trying to get my attention. That coaster is still on my desk. I still use it. But these days, when I look at it, what I think is, what if be happy was the wrong instruction all along? What if the feelings we keep trying to get past are actually the ones most worth pausing for? Welcome to Continuing Education, a podcast for homeschooling families with actually useful information. I'm Heidi, and today we're doing our inclusive devotional. And if you're new here, that's when we take a minute to ponder a topic in order to rest, inspire, or motivate us. We don't rely on a specific religion. Instead, we pull from various news, research, and cultures around the globe. And today we're going to be talking about that tension of emotion. Before we actually get into more of the chatter, I did want to let you know that you can follow me on homeschoolce.substack.com. I do these podcasts, and you can find them on all the major podcast outlets or apps. But I also will sometimes occasionally release things, just writings that I have, and that's on my Substack. I also have free things. So recently I did an Animal Farm study guide where my kiddos and we read Animal Farm together, and I released the study guide that we used. I used AI to draft it, so don't think of it as anything amazing. But I did confirm that it's all factual, and it's free. So if you go to my Substack, you can grab the same guide that we use. It's free, good discussion. Animal Farm is a great book if you have kiddos in middle or high school that you're kind of working with. All right, so let's go ahead and chat about the heart of the episode. We're going to talk about the tension. Here's the thing about homeschooling parents, and honestly, I think this applies to parents in general, of course, but especially us because we are with our people all day long and we are trained to fix things. And that's not an insult, it's actually a skill. We troubleshoot learning gaps. We shift curriculum when something isn't working. We pivot when the day falls apart. We are remarkably good at identifying a problem and moving toward a solution. It's one of the reasons so many of us are good at this particular kind of life. But we tend to apply that same problem-solving instinct to our emotion. That something uncomfortable kind of shows up and we immediately start looking for an exit. If I'm anxious, for example, I make a list. If I'm sad, I look for something to do. If I'm overwhelmed, I either push through it or I collapse. But in either case, I'm not exactly sitting with the thing. I'm trying to kind of outlast it or outrun it. And I don't think we do this because we're emotionally avoidant exactly. I think we do it because somewhere we absorbed the idea that feelings, or at least difficult feelings, are problems to be solved, that there's somehow evidence of something being wrong, and that the goal is to get back to okay as fast as possible. The truth is, I think most of us have learned to treat our feelings like that kid who keeps tugging at our sleeve while we're trying to focus. We kind of half acknowledge them. Maybe we say, yeah, I see you. And then we look away and hope they find something else to do. What if that's the exact wrong approach? There's a poem by the 13th century Persian poet Rumi that I keep coming back to. I've read it a couple of times and it's called The Guest House. I want to read it to you. Go ahead and settle in. Um, Here's the poem. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if there are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I don't know about you, but the first time I really sat with this line that each has been sent as a guide, I kind of feel something shift. Not the feelings we choose, not the comfortable arrivals, each one. Even the crowd of sorrows, even the meanness, even the dark thought, they're not accidents and they're not evidence of failure. They're, as this poet puts it, they're guides. And that's kind of a different relationship than I think I have with most of my hard feelings. Now, Rumi is writing from a spiritual tradition, and the poem kind of carries that. But there's a Harvard psychologist named Susan David who reached a very similar conclusion through a completely different type of work, through research, through her clinical work, through decades of studying what actually helps people thrive. So I wanted to chat a little bit about that. She has this line where she says, emotions are data, they are not directives. Oh, I love that. Emotions are data, they are not directives. What that means, the way she explains it, and this is from her book, Emotional Agility. I found this on the Libby app through my local library as an ebook. So if this is something that you're interested in, but you don't want to go buy the book, I recommend pulling up the Libby app with your local library and getting ebooks through there. Basically, that the way she explains it is that a feeling is carrying information. It's pointing at something real, but it is not like a commandment. It's not a command. You don't have to obey it to learn from it. The feeling of dread before a difficult conversation, for example, that's data about something that you care about. The sudden heaviness on a Tuesday afternoon for no apparent reason, that might be data about depletion or loneliness or some kind of need that's going unmet for too long. Maybe the anger that rises up during a lesson that's going sideways. If you get quiet and actually listen to it, you can kind of get down to the root of things. It might be something telling you something about how hard you've been pushing or how much you needed this to work or how tired you are. She says in her book, and I find this really interesting, the most difficult emotions signpost the things we care about. The most difficult ones, not the easy, pleasant ones, the hard arrivals, those are the ones that are pointing most directly at what matters to you the most. I really sit with that because I think that a lot of times I have these difficult emotions, things like anxiety or things like insufficiency, and I feel like I need to somehow be better or do better when actually they may be data that I care deeply about this. And that can kind of shift the way that I care, that I think about that thing that's causing this emotion. There's a Japanese concept I stumbled on a while back called mono no aware, and roughly translated as I understand it, it's referring to the pathos of things. It's about the awareness of impermanence, specifically the bittersweet feeling that comes when you're present to the fact that things like moments and seasons and phases of your children's childhood are passing and won't come back. And what I find remarkable about this concept is that it holds both sadness and appreciation at the same time. And it doesn't ask you to choose. It almost says that the sadness is part of the appreciation. The fact that something moves you, that something aches a little, that's not a problem to fix. That's you being fully awake to what's happening. That the beauty of life is sometimes fleeting. And while we appreciate and love the moments and seasons that we're in, there's also a sadness that it's passing by. I think about that a lot in the context of homeschooling. Some of the hardest feelings in this life are actually love. They're just love in a form that doesn't look like love from the outside. The overwhelm that comes from caring this much, the grief that shows up when a season ends, the anxiety that then trails behind the question of whether you're doing enough, which really, at the root of it, a question about how much these people, these little beings, really matter to you. And I don't think that this Japanese aesthetic, it doesn't ask you to be stoic. It doesn't say feel less. It says sit with the feeling long enough to receive what it brings and let it be the weight that confirms that something is real, that emotion that you feel, how deeply you care about your children and about preparing them for the life that they are embarking upon. The fact that you feel worry or grief or anxiety, that you're constantly worrying, constantly thinking about, am I doing enough? And that may be an uncomfortable feeling. That is confirmation that you feel deeply about this and that you care and love your babies in deep, meaningful ways. So here's kind of the way that I'm reframing in my mind. What if the next time those difficult feelings show up, like the feeling of insufficiency or the feeling of anxiety, not those pleasant ones, right? These are the hard ones, the ones that you kind of want to slide past. But instead of looking for an exit or looking for a solution, you asked a question, not to be a clinical way, not even to make you feel obligated to like suddenly write it down and, do a journaling exercise kind of thing. Just kind of a quiet pondering in your mind. I've been asking myself when these feelings show up, what are you here for? And here's what I'm finding. When I actually ask myself, what am I here for? What am I doing this for? There's almost always an answer. Sometimes it's a comfortable one and sometimes it's not, depending on what the situation is. But there is an answer. And the heaviness after a hard lesson day wasn't random. It might have been telling me that I needed to rest and I wasn't letting myself have it. Or when I was feeling, irritable, that I was trying to get something done and, with work and, it wasn't working the way that I wanted to. Maybe that irritability was kind of surfacing. Maybe it was about a boundary that I'd let get eroded down to nothing. Maybe the low-grade anxiety that some of us carry for weeks is pointing directly at a decision that we've been actively avoiding making. The point is maybe just asking yourself and getting curious about the emotion and sitting with it and thinking it through will actually point to the root of it. That the feelings themselves are not the problems, that they're actually information. And if we stop treating them like unwelcome guests and start treating them more like messengers who had come a long way to deliver something, our relationship with those feelings can shift. I'm not saying this fixes anything. Those hard feelings don't disappear. They still arrive, sometimes in crowds, sometimes at the worst possible moment. But there's a difference that I'm noticing in myself between standing at the door saying, not now, not now, and opening the door and saying, okay, what did you come to tell me? And that difference, I think, is what emotional honesty looks like in a life as full and as busy as ours as homeschooling parents. If you want to bring this into your day with your kiddos, because I think that regulations, that's the right word. I think that this is actually something that would be helpful for our kiddos to learn. Here are some questions that might open something up. These are gentle ones and there are no right answers. For little ones, you could say, if your sad feeling were a character in a story, what would it look like? What would it need? Little kids are often really surprisingly concrete and insightful when you give them kind of a creative way in. For those middle years, you might say something like, have you ever had a feeling that you didn't understand? What did you think it was trying to tell you? That way you're kind of inviting them to think more, deeper beyond the feeling. I remember when one of my kids really struggled with being angry a lot. And I remember reading that anger was actually like anger was the bodyguard of another feeling. Like anger is the bodyguard of being scared. And I kind of thought about that a lot that, when someone feels angry, there's an underlying feeling. There's anger is the secondary emotion. The initial feeling is being scared or being sad. I think scared was probably the one that came up in my mind the most, that anger is just kind of this emotional reaction to protect ourselves. And that's why anger is that bodyguard to kind of the root feeling so that we don't feel vulnerable. And so, kind of getting them to think about what do you think it was trying to tell you might be allowing them to kind of get a little deeper. If you have older kiddos, maybe high schoolers, you could ask something like, is there a difference between having a feeling and believing everything that feeling says? And then what would that look like? That's actually Susan David's territory in that book that I talked about, Feelings as Data, Not Directives. And teenagers are usually ready to chat about that and talk about that in a deeper way. Or you could say, what's a feeling you keep pushing away? What might happen if you just let it be there for a minute? And one, of course, that you can ask yourself after a hard day is, what was today's difficult feeling pointing at? Not to solve it, just to notice it. That's okay. We don't have to solve all our feelings. Rumi, that I mentioned before, says each feeling has been sent as a guide. Susan David, she says our emotions contain flashing lights pointing toward what we care about. And somewhere in that centuries-old Japanese aesthetic, there is the understanding that feeling deeply, even when what you're feeling is loss or grief or the particular exhaustion of a life that's full and busy, it's not a failure of composure. It is the mark of someone who is awake and deeply cares. You are doing something hard and real. The feelings that come with it are not your enemies. They're telling the truth. All sources that we talked about today, they are in our show notes. So if this is something that you want to dive into deeply, or you want to read more about the topic that I talked about, I've gone ahead and include that in the show notes. Again, please be happy. That is not what I meant to say. That was like a commandment that I was referring back to. Yikes. Okay. If you want to follow me, please follow me on homeschoolce.substack.com. I did this past weekend. I presented at a homeschool conference, and I realized that there's a lot of interest in some of the kind of scheduling and routines of it all. So I will be talking about that next. So please join us again, follow along, subscribe, and all that. If there's a topic that you want to hear about, please send us a note on homeschoolce.substack.com. I'd love to talk about more about the things that are kind of plaguing you, you're thinking about, the things that are difficult in your homeschool. I'm Heidi. Take good care, and we'll chat next time.